our Power of Democracy presentation on the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury. We're happy to see you all today. Before we get started, we're going to go over some Zoom norms. And so we would like to ask you to please make sure to mute yourself, use your real name in your Zoom, use a chat box or raise your hand to participate. And we will be taking questions. You're free to add questions to the chat, and we also have time at the end allotted for questions. When prompted, it's okay to unmute. So if we, later in the presentation, we're going to say, if you'd like to ask your question out loud, feel free to unmute and do so, or again, you can use a chat. If your bandwidth allows and you feel comfortable, keep your camera turned on and participate in a way that promotes the greater good, which is the main goal of civics work. Next slide. My name is Olivia Santillan. I am a coordinator at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. And I'm a coordinator of history, social science, and civic engagement. And one reason for hosting this event today is at the County Office of Education, we have an initiative called the Power of Democracy. And the Power of Democracy was born out of the California court system as a way of promoting civic engagement K-12 and helping and hoping that people understand more how the courts work. And as it is one of the branches of our federal government. Also wanted to share about some events coming up around democracy and civics. So September 17th is Constitution Day. And on that day, schools incorporate events around the Constitution. In Santa Clara County, our Superior Court participates in Constitution Day yearly through offering classroom activities and videos with information about Constitution Day and the court. And when we are in a space where we can be in person again, we have judges who go into the classroom. We also have a partnership with the Registrar of Voters, and there's an opportunity for educators. And so I'm going to drop a link in the chat shortly that includes an application for an initiative called My Voice, My Vote, which focuses on voting rights in Santa Clara County. And also a link is included in a resource on the State Seal of Civic Engagement. So if you're an educator or if you have a child in the schools, this is an opportunity for students to get a seal in 11th or 12th grade if they meet particular criteria. So again, welcome. And I'm going to hand it off to Britney Huelbig from the Santa Clara County Superior Court.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and thank you for your continued support and partnership with the Superior Court. And so thank you everyone for being here. Good afternoon. My name is Britney Huelbig, and I am so excited to be with you all this afternoon for all of us to learn more and discuss the ins and outs of the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury. And so I serve as a deputy manager for the Superior Court here in Santa Clara County, and I have the pleasure of facilitating the work of the Civil Grand Jury. During today's presentation, we will focus on the Civil Grand Jury as an institution in California. So while often confused with jury duty for Superior Court trials, the grand jury system is distinct and dates back to the 12th century. And so we'll spend some time discussing its formation and what the civil grand jury looks like today in Santa Clara County. We will then be joined by 3 active members of the 2021 Civil Grand Jury who will share their perspective on answering the call to serve on the 2021 panel. Finally, we will discuss the court's active recruitment and for the 2022 panel and answer any questions you may have about this unique opportunity. So what is the civil grand jury? The grand jury system actually originated in England in the 12th century. It immigrated to the colonies and later moved westward to California. Why go back nearly 1,000 years into early English history? because what we are discussing has evolved from very basic principles that were codified then and have now matured over the centuries. As early as 1066, a group of 12 leading citizens in each English community was formed to bring charges against anyone who committed a crime. There is speculation that this may have been the origin of today's trial jury system. By 1176, the concept of a grand jury inquest by a body of 24 knights, as selected by the sheriff of the county, was in place. And in 1215, we see the grand jury is even mentioned in the Magna Carta. The genesis of the grand jury's watchdog function developed during this same period. While the primary role of inquest in early England was a means of apprehending and punishing those accused of crimes, records from the Grand Inquest included that the point was to present accusations of neglect of duty for those who were responsible to keep and repair bridges, causeways, and highways, and to inquire into defects of the detention facilities. That was 600 years ago, and today civil grand juries are still the investigative agencies responsible for the oversight of infrastructure and for inquiring into the upkeep of jails. By the 17th century, grand juries were independent and the concept of secrecy had evolved. This concept is now embodied as confidentiality and still remains central to grand jury service. This model of an independent local or county grand jury also remains with us to this day. We can then see that grand juries were part of our original state constitution. Section 23 of Article 1 of the California Constitution requires that a grand jury be drawn and summoned at least once a year in each county. As constituted today, the grand jury is a part of the judicial branch of government and works as an arm of the court. This constitutional mandate is supported by statutory provisions in the California codes, which are 29 legal codes enacted by the California State Legislature. Sections of the California Penal Code, as listed on the slide here, relate to the selection and empanelment of grand jurors and to the grand jury's watchdog and indictment functions. Government code sections cover the grand jury's accusation process. Many of the statutory provisions related to the grand jury have been reviewed and interpreted by the California Supreme Court and the Courts of Appeal. Their written opinions, also known as case law, clarify the powers and duties of the grand jury. Because of the complexity of state law, the California legislature has also provided legal assistance for each county grand jury. Today, in Santa Clara County, this includes our county counsel's office and the office of the district attorney. So what else has developed? Today, the number of grand jurors depends on the population of the county. In Santa Clara County, we currently have 19 citizens who are selected to compose one independent body. All voting is equal on the grand jury, and while a foreperson is appointed by the court, no voter or juror in our great democracy can be ignored or taken for granted. The civil grand jury functions lawfully only as a body, and so while much of the work of the grand jury is done in committees, a majority of the panel, or 12 members, must agree on all final findings and recommendations. We are going to dive a little bit deeper into the responsibilities of the civil grand jury, but essentially, this civil watchdog agency ensures the accountability of public entities and serves as a fact-finding body for citizen complaints. Grand jurors are impaneled in our county for a one-year term, and that is on a calendar year basis, but they can apply to serve a second consecutive term as a holdover grand juror. Looking at the responsibilities of the civil grand jury, we can see there are three primary functions. The civil watchdog role is the major function of present-day grand juries, and considerable effort is devoted to these responsibilities. The grand jury may examine all aspects of county and city government and special districts to ensure that the best interests of Santa Clara County residents are being served. The grand jury reviews and evaluates procedures, methods, and systems that are utilized by county and city government to determine whether more efficient and economical programs may be employed. The grand jury is also authorized to inspect and audit the books, records, and financial expenditures to ensure that public funds are properly accounted for and legally spent. The grand jury is further authorized to inquire into the conditions of all jails and detention centers in the county. The next function would be the accusation function. This is rarely used. However, grand jurors are authorized to inquire into charges of willful misconduct in office by public officials or employees, and to determine whether to present formal accusations requesting removal from office. Most grand jury findings and the corresponding recommendations for solutions are contained in final reports. These describe problems encountered while performing these two previously listed functions, and it is what the grand jury spends a considerable amount of time working toward releasing. So during their term, the grand jury may issue final reports at any time, and any entity or official that is the subject of one of these reports must comment and provide an official response to the grand jury's recommendations. These reports are posted on the Superior Court website, and you can see here a press release that was distributed by the court for the fiscal year 2019-2020 reports. A summary of each report is included on this press release for the 2019-2020 term. However, you can also see all reports and agency responses going back to 2001, which are posted on the court's public website and will be circulated as part of this presentation. The link will be. So the civil grand jury may also receive complaints from residents raising concerns about local government or its officials. These complaints are acknowledged and may be the basis of a grand jury investigation and a final report. Anyone may submit a grand jury complaint, and all complaints are kept confidential. Grand jurors may also simply elect to review the operations of an agency of local government within its jurisdiction, unrelated to any particular complaint, so long as the goal is to promote accountability and improve efficacy and effectiveness. And so you can see here this complaint form that is also posted on the court website and is available to all who visit. So who may the grand jury investigate? The column on the left covers the main areas of focus where the grand jury has jurisdiction. The civil grand jury does not have jurisdiction over the courts, state or federal government, or most private citizens or corporations. Going back to the legislature's recognition of the complex nature of these tasks, and therefore the requirement to have legal advisors for the grand jury, a functional analysis may be needed and supported by counsel to determine if private citizens or corporations are funded to or actually perform government functions. If, for example, a nonprofit receives 100% of its funding from the county, it may be subject to oversight of the grand jury, even if it is a private organization. So with this in mind, let's take a look at who serves on the civil grand jury. Listed here are the penal code requirements for serving on the civil grand jury in California, as well as the requirement from the Fair Political Practice Commission for grand jurors to file a financial disclosure form to ensure transparency. It is important to note that there are only 4 disqualifiers. A person is ineligible to act as a grand juror if he or she or they are serving as a trial juror, have been discharged from grand jury service within the preceding year, have been convicted of a felony, malfeasance in office, or other high crime, or are actively serving as a public official. Beyond this, the court strives to recruit a diverse group of individuals from all educational, career, and walks of life backgrounds to ensure that we can have a body that is representative of the community that it serves. What we really hope for is those with strong ethics to volunteer their time and talents to this oversight body. The civil grand jury does serve on a calendar year term, as I mentioned earlier. And so we did want to provide a general outline of how the year is typically broken down. The start of the year does include orientation events, trainings, site visits as possible. We wanted to make sure to recognize that we understand the world is constantly developed, and so site visits have looked a little different over the last year and a half. But towards the middle of the term, we start to see more specialized visits, actions, interviews, and activities that are really focused on specific investigations and preparing reports. And then, of course, more training. And then toward the end of the term, the grand jury does work to finalize its investigations, review, edit, and release their reports. Throughout the entire term of a grand jury, the grand jurors receive and review complaints from the public. That's that complaint form that we talked about earlier. And they must also maintain confidentiality throughout all of their duties. And this obligation actually extends indefinitely as outlined in the Penal Code. The Penal Code section 924.1 does include that a grand juror who, except when required by the court, discloses any evidence adduced before the grand jury or information about deliberations can actually be found guilty of a misdemeanor. And so when we do a lot of the training in the beginning, we make sure to cover all of the relevant pieces around the code sections, the constitutional mandate, and how grand jurors from all backgrounds can successfully complete these duties. So in 2020, and in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the institution of the grand jury, with support from the County Board of Supervisors, did transition to a calendar year term. And so this has required our 2021 panel to exercise flexibility and discretion in completing their duties. Both the County of Santa Clara and Superior Court have provided training and technological resources to ensure that the good work of the grand jury can continue in a confidential manner, and that the safety and health of grand jurors can be prioritized while they continue to perform their duties. So more information about the court's response to the COVID-19 pandemic can also be found on the court's public website. We are currently recruiting for the 2022 panel, and we do anticipate that we will continue on this calendar year term. The grand jury does operate under the guidance of our presiding judge, who's presiding judge Theodore Zahner, and you can see a photo and a quote from him here. The court, like I said, is actively recruiting applicants, and we will be accepting applications through Friday, September the 17th. I encourage those of you who have not submitted an application but are interested in either learning more or obtaining an application to visit the court website. It's www.scscourt.org. And we're also going to go ahead and provide that in the chat for you. But you can learn more about that. We also are going to hear a little bit about service on the grand jury, and then have question and answers after. So if you have any questions about recruitment, please feel free to ask them. But at this time, I am honored to turn the presentation over to Dev Ghoshal, Allison Madriaga, and Shane Somavia, who are active members of the 2021 Civil Grand Jury and have joined us today. So Allison has generously agreed to serve as the moderator for today's panel discussion, and the court greatly appreciates the willingness of each of these jurors and their colleagues to dedicate their time and effort to this important public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Miss Olivia Santillan and the rest of the Santa Clara County Office of Education for organizing this event. As Brittany said, my name is Allison, and I'm a student at De Anza College, and this is my first term serving as a civil grand juror. This is also my colleagues Dev and Shane's first term serving, and so with that, let's get started. So our first question for today is, why did you apply to the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury? And we can start off with Dev. Dev?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Allison. And great to be here. And I think it was almost a year back when I first heard about the civil grand jury and its role. And I believe it was in the Neighborhood Next Door publication. And I was actually intrigued by the potential application of my experience and background to the role. I didn't know there was a civil grand jury, and that is very different, as Brittany pointed out, from the trial grand jury that we hear about. But I've spent about 20 plus years in the world of large business organizations, helping startups grow, and you end up creating, as in many roles, a set of skills, right? How to solve problems, how to interview people, how to look at facts, how to understand complex issues, and come out with a set of recommendations, and also convince and work with the team. And to me, it was amazing how many of these skills could be applied to the role of the grand jury when applied to the civil government around us. So I found that to be a very exciting role, and I jumped into it. And I must also point out, I had been thinking about volunteer work, but I really wasn't interested in just, doing things like fundraising or being on a volunteer board. I wanted to really get deeper into some issues and problems and help, solve them, or at least contribute to their answers. And I found that the grand jury role was actually unique in that it's very focused on complaints or on particular topics of concern that the grand jury decides on. And then in a mutual way, we try to solve it, provide some recommendations. So there was a great fit, and I've really enjoyed it. Back to you, Allison.
All right. Thank you, Dev. Yeah, so I agree with Dev that I think it was about mid-pandemic when I also found out about it. But before I share my piece, let's go on to Shane.
Yes, thank you, Allison. And again, it's a pleasure to meet with you all today and giving us an opportunity to tell our story. So what led me to apply to be a member of the civil grand jury, having grown up in Gilroy, and in Santa Clara County, I personally benefited from the institutions, the systems, and the programs that were offered by the city and the county. And so this gave me a platform or a way of giving of my time, my talents, and my efforts to public service as well. And in doing so, it gives others through the civil grand jury work opportunities for fellow citizens and families to thrive based on the improvements we're able to generate through these reports, findings, and recommendations. The second motivation was I spent 29 years in the military, and one thing that I lacked, whether it was a benefit or not, was I didn't get selected for any trial juries. So I didn't have any jury service. So this, or all those missed opportunities, formed a consolidation of missed opportunities, if you will, and motivated me to apply for the civil grand jury.
Thank you, Shane. So in addition to those two different backgrounds, so I applied because I studied history, politics, and economics in London, England for about 3 years. And there I got the opportunity to do a lot of public sector work as well. So for example, I had an internship with the regional government in Germany. And I also went as far as working for a European Union group in Bulgaria. And so as I was more active there as, just like an international student, when I came back here, I also realized I wanted to do something very similar, that I needed to be more active in politics in general, or in just government in general. This is where I will be. I saw the civil grand jury as like a good way to look at each county department and where I could possibly see myself starting my career. So with all of that, we can see that everyone has different backgrounds, and we were able to apply that to the civil grand jury, which we'll explain in the next question. And so we've covered a bit of it, which is, what is your background? But now, how does that background contribute to the grand jury itself. And again, we will start off with Dev.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. And I think I sort of touched on it in my previous, monologue, but it is, coming from a business world, you learn a lot about, problem solving, working with teams, just being practical and trying to look for practical answers, and also convincing people, right? Because you'll have different people, and all of those things are, to me, and I found out in the last 6 months, crucial to the role of a grand jury and how we work together as a group of 19 where everybody has an equal voice. So I think that's really been very useful for me in transferring those skills to the work that we're doing. And I think also you learn to apply it to institutions and organizations that you may not have exposed to, like, different organizations within the city. One thing I did find very interesting to learn was I spent the last 10 years, helping grow a few startups in the Valley, is fairly common. And one of the things you learn when you're part of a startup, where you're growing in a very small organization, trying to grow big and build up a team, is you learn to collaborate without ego. And that is crucial because you're mostly working with large companies, partners, customers who are much bigger than you, and you want to convince them and work together. And I think that is crucial to the grand jury because each of us have an equal voice with very different background and perspectives, and working to collaborate without making it personal, without having a point of view, but not necessarily always being on the majority side. That's part of the discussion and the conclusions we come to. So that's been very, I think, an important lesson I learned that I think has been very worthwhile and relevant here.
Thank you, Dev. So yeah, I definitely agree with Dev. We've definitely, or just all of us in general, have definitely had a few more challenges in addition to COVID with butting heads. And it was a big adjustment, but we are almost nearing our term. And I think all of us have kind of almost found our flow. And with that, we can go on to Shane.
Yes, thank you, Allison. So my background, as I mentioned briefly, I spent 29 years directly out of high school serving in the United States Air Force. One thing that military service brought me, among the many things, was, it brought people
Shane, I
from
think we're
all
losing you a little.
essentially the role of as well. One thing that the military does quite well is training. So through a lot of personal education, training, and the experience that I've received over that 29 years, it's really aligned quite well with my service in the grand jury. How do you interact with other people? How are you developing your senses of empathy, if you will? How to be a better listener using active listening techniques, effective writing, developing analytical as well as problem-solving skills. The other types of skills that I learned through experience definitely is collaboration, which you do a lot of in the civil grand jury, as well as with cities, the county, and agencies within the county. And then the last thing that kind of formed a little bit of my background is I'm a volunteer. I tutor computer. And so that with serving the community. So that's essentially my background. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Just letting you know, I think you're fading in and out a bit. So for me, I would say, so I think it was in the 2019 civil grand jury. They had, I think there was no applicants who applied between the 18 to 25 age range. So that's obviously one part of my background is that I'm actually the youngest in our group of 19 at 24. And so I kind of represent more of the college students and just kind of like the younger generation. And in addition to that, I believe I'm also the one who only has the politics background. So when it comes to us like talking about content within this particular institution, and if it seems to be more political rather than just practical, I guess, descriptions of it, I do try to explain to them what, my findings and what I've learned from school. In addition to that, I am obviously a minority as well. I am Filipino, and we have a few minority members in the civil grand jury as well. So I also bring in diversity, and hopefully that is something we can continue to increase next term. So for our third question, Dev, how would you describe your time serving, or how would you describe your term overall, considering this is your first term?
Thanks, Allison. And by the way, it's amazing what she brings to the table. It's quite incredible. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's been very, very, exciting. It's been a great learning experience and just enjoyable. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. As Allison said, we have taken on some fascinating topics, some through complaints, some through just interest, looking at different organizations within the county. And there's been a lot of conversations, discussions about, lots of interviews with people. As a grand jury, you can call anybody. So the entire experience has been fascinating. And I think if I were to reflect on 2 or 3 things that I really will treasure the most, I think the first one, I think as we have all pointed out, is the variety of the people you get to meet. You tend to be in all our, no matter what your career or background, you tend to meet people in the same echo chamber, right? In high tech, I meet the same people saying the same things, using the same, and then all of a sudden you have 19 people, some from the armed services like Shane, some are students with a fascinating background like Allison. We have 911 operators in the background. We have educators. We have people with legal background. So you put that in the mix of everybody wanting to do something good. It's a great interaction. So I've really enjoyed that by far the most. Wish we could meet more face to face, but that's part of the challenges for this tenure. But I think we'll remain close. The learning part has been incredible. You get to learn about all these organizations that impact our life every day. That's the police, the hospitals, the housing activities going on. The topics that I would not have touched on. So I think the learning curve has been very pleasant. And I think it's also been very, very interesting to be part of a non-hierarchical environment, because at least in my world, there's a hierarchy no matter what one says. There are different titles, there's roles, and you tend to kind of follow that, and you manage up and manage down. I mean, here everybody truly has a say. There's a voting system, and so you really have to take into account everybody's point of view, and everybody has a point of view. So I think that's again been a very unique part of this experience. So yeah, those would be the 3 that I would treasure going into as I finish the latter part of the term.
Thank you, Dev. So yeah, I would also take this time to say that one of Dev's very strong skills, especially coming from his background, is that when we're sitting in our 2-hour meetings and there's a lot of going back and forth, he helps make it go along with the action items. So Shane, you're on next. How would you describe your term and your own experiences within the grand jury?
Thank you, Allison. First, my apologies. The internet in South County isn't as quite as what I expect. And so if I start fading out, please. I would describe my time in 3 terms, such as collaborative and rewarding. Productive in the sense that the civil grand jury targets each individual's strength, to advance the civil grand jury's objectives as a way to improve operation and how better government that serves its people. Collaboration, because serving on the civil grand jury, it kind of forces you to collaborate among jurors. Person has all the answers. You come up with the best solutions when you come up with them together. And we've really seen that as our term progressed. And then the last one, rewarding, similar to Allison's description of it, diversity is really brings forth strength, and we see that and we recognize it. And so it really has given me an opportunity to meet that I wouldn't normally have an opportunity to meet. And I really having that opportunity, meeting those people of different backgrounds, having different strengths. And so that's how I would characterize my time serving on the civil grand jury.
Thank you, Shane. And I see there's a chat and Brittany got it. Okay, thank you so much for that. I would also like to take the time to say that even though Shane is having connection issues right now, I guarantee you that on the grand jury itself, he is our star grand juror just because of his wonderful organizational skills that he probably got from working at the Pentagon. So I would say my time, taking into account being the youngest one and that everyone else on the grand jury has worked in their jobs for at least 20, 30 years. It was challenging, even though I had all those teamwork experiences abroad. I thought that would be enough, but no, this is a new challenge. And I would also say, since I am at the beginning of my career and I haven't had much experience yet working in other fields, that was also another challenge for me. But it was challenging, but with a lot of personal growth that came out of it. I like to joke a lot that I wanted to resign so many times, but I'm actually grateful that I didn't and that I'm sticking through it. And I'm so excited to see what comes out by the end of this term. And I would say there's, a lot of the diversity that we're trying to pool and, a lot of outreach that we're trying to do. I think this particular group of jurors has been more proactive than recent ones. And we've really kind of pushed our boundaries, but asked questions like, can we change this? Can we change that? And, Brittany has been so helpful, and so has Judge Sainer. Just because I guess for me, if you don't ask, it doesn't hurt, or it will hurt you, but if you don't ask, you're never going to get the answer that you want. You should at least try. But I'm hoping that future grand jurors will actually continue this kind of legacy of being more proactive and reach out to more communities, and just to see what else is out there or what other opportunities there are that you could, help the community. And so for our last question, what would you tell someone who is contemplating to serve on the civil grand jury? And we can start off with Deb on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Yeah, again, I think it'll get a bit repetitive, but I think to me, if you have the time, right, and it does take a fair amount of time, I think it's around 20 plus hours a week. Again, it varies depending on the time, because it's a bit less so in the beginning, but once you really get involved with those investigations and interviews and reports, you end up spending a fair amount of time. So if you have the time, I think it's, in my opinion, one of the most interesting things you can do. So I would strongly encourage everybody to explore this more and understand it more and see if it fits with your schedule and interest. and if you become a grand juror, again, going back to my themes of what I found interesting, it's, be ready to listen to a variety of opinions on those topics, be ready to learn a lot about organizations, and issues that you may not have been exposed to. And the great thing is you can also choose to, there's many investigations going on, and depending on your own interest, you can pick and join any of them that appeals to you. So we tend to pick up one or two of those. So you get exposed to a lot of topics, but you go deep dive into a few, and you vote on each and every one of them. And I think the most important thing to me, at least, would be to really see the whole democratic process in action, democracy in action, because each juror truly has a single vote, no matter what their background experience. They all have a clear vote, and it all counts. You as a citizen get to call in anybody, from the city mayors to the board of supervisors, if it pertains to the investigation, and ask them any question you want and ask for any information you need to understand the topic at hand. And we don't get that to do that every day, and to improve, both to learn and to improve the organization. So I think I think it's, I know I heard about trial jurors, but this is an entirely different animal, and a fascinating one at that. So, those would be my thoughts for anybody who is looking at it seriously.
All right. Thank you, Dev. I would agree. There's a little bit of everything for everybody. It's not uncommon for people to join everything at the beginning and then kind of refine which subcommittees they want to join later on. And Shane? Shane?
Thank you, Allison. So what I would tell someone who's contemplating applying for the 2022 civil grand jury, kind of echoing Dev's words, definitely encourage them, to offer their time and abilities. But I'd also be honest with them and candid about the commitment, the time commitment, because, we best influence decisions and inputs to recommendations by participating. So you definitely have to participate in order to come up with the best recommendations. The other thing I would, recommend they do is become, regular participants in civic and public meetings, whether it be, town hall meetings or board of supervisor meetings, any of those public meetings, because it's going to give them a context for order, as well as procedure and decorum. How do you treat other members that are serving with you in that meeting capacity? The other thing I would recommend they do is, as Britney mentioned, definitely have them read the California Penal Code, because it's going to give them context and scope on what the civil grand jury actually does. Like Dev mentioned, a lot of people that we interact with think that we're a criminal grand jury, and they're quite shocked, or maybe don't know exactly what a civil grand jury does. And so the best way to explain it is by knowing it, and that penal code is going to give them some good background. It's not a lot to read, and it's there for the public's use. And then the last thing I would tell them is definitely acquaint themselves with the previous archived civil grand jury reports from prior years, because again, that's going to give them scope and breadth of what the civil grand jury looks at. It also will show and explain to them how the civil grand jury can impact and improve government operations, if they aren't already familiar with those reports as well. Plus, it kind of gives them a little bit of an insight into writing style. How do civil grand juries use that report as a platform or echo of their voice? And it'll give them some good insight into that as well. So thank you very much, Allison.
Thank you, Shane. And you did not cut out, by the way. So for me, I would say consider what you would like to get out of it. It was also not uncommon for people at the beginning of the year, if they were chosen, maybe the grand jury isn't what they expected, or it was a lot more hours. I would say consider that first, because if you consider that, it will also tell you how much effort you're willing to put into it. I would also say, agree with Dev, that you're going to also need to consider the time. Right now, it's for this COVID term, we've had the flexibility, so we didn't have to worry about driving all the way downtown for 9 a.m. meetings. But also a lot of us on the grand jury also have like maybe part-time jobs or other obligations that we are able to work around. I would say those are the two main ones. And with that, if Dev or Shane have any closing thoughts that they wanted to share, and I'll pass it on to Miss Olivia and Brittany. I don't think they do. So Brittany and Miss Olivia.
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat. And so I'm just going to let any one of you all answer it, and including Brittany. So how does the grand jury accommodate travel?
I'm happy to take that one if that would be helpful. Great. So, and I'm just going to combine, because I saw a question about pre-COVID versus post-COVID. And, you know, I know we're actively in the middle of a pandemic, so I don't want to discredit that our community is still struggling with that. And we really are still benefiting greatly from the flexibility of our current panel in figuring out what things look like. So in terms of accommodating travel, the court does offer mileage reimbursement for all official grand jury business. So on any trips, if you have document review, site tours, investigations that are in person, there is a county rate that changes every year. At this point, it's at 56 cents per mile driven. And so that is the mileage reimbursement. There's also a daily per diem rate. And pre-COVID, that mileage rate would be reimbursed for even the committee meetings that I know Allison, Dev, and Shane have talked about, for all of these trainings and tours. However, in the current world and reality that we live in, most grand jury activities are still functioning remotely. We're all getting very used to saying you're still muted. And so there is not as much mileage or travel accommodation, but that is something that active grand jurors are entitled to claim.
All right, thank you. And then we have a question. What has been the most impactful report or recommendations for this year?
So I can take that one. So anything that will be produced this year will most likely be towards the end. We can't really discuss them as that's still part of our confidentiality agreement, but it's just that most reports, like we try to get them out early, but with our current schedule right now, we'll most likely be pushing them out towards the end of the year. It's just that those reports go through a variety of processes, such as like sharing it with legal counsel, sharing it with Brittany, sharing it with a judge just before it's released. And then we're also required by law to send copies or have exit interviews with the actual entity that we're dealing with.
Thank you. Another question, is it mostly committee work and bringing their information, investigation to the entire grand jury to vote?
You want me to take that, Allison?
So the way it works is that, like, for example, if there's a general complaint, that first off, the jury has to vote on whether to accept or reject that. That's basically it. And then after that, it can go off to a committee. And usually at the end, like when they're finalizing the report that comes out of it, it also does need to be reviewed by everyone in the committee, just because those reports are a product of the entire jury and not just individual committees or individual jurors. There is no like minority report or anything like that.
Okay, how many projects did the grand jury take on during this term?
So I'll hop in here if that's okay and just say that the grand jurors now, who are wonderfully here to share their perspective, are actually prohibited from talking about any active investigations or projects. And so I'm sure they would love to be able to provide some specific information, but I will just say that historically, if you go onto the court's website, the 1920 civil grand jury did release 6 final reports. And those really ranged in page length. I think one of them was about 60 pages. I think one was about 14 pages. And so it varies. In the past, we have seen that some grand juries release 10, 12 reports. They don't always, a report does not have to be written for every investigation or project that a grand jury works on. However, legally, the grand jury is required to produce at least 1 report. And then I can also share that last year, the grand jury received and considered over 50 complaints. And I would say that's fairly typical for a term.
Okay, next question. How many times did the 3 members apply to get chosen?
Once, just once, but there's several interviews. I don't know if Shane or Deb want to jump in.
Yeah, I was the same with Allison. I applied once and had an interview with the presiding judge.
Yeah, same process. Yeah.
Okay, what if a juror wants to take time off to travel, for example, to Europe? Is that permitted?
Can I come?
Yep.
I can start, Brittany, if you want to touch on anything I may miss. But in the application process, they ask you if you have any scheduled vacation, and for you to put those dates there for the awareness of the court. And then, of course, it's a decision that you have to come to, knowing that you're leaving your fellow jurors to pick up some of that work that you're leaving behind.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Shane said, but we have also had across the year several jurors who had commitments to other things, travel, and we're able to usually manage around that easily. You might miss a meeting here or there, but obviously, if you have a protracted, vacation plan of several weeks or month, that might pose a bit of a challenge. But again, most of the time, we're able to work it out between the committees and the work to be done.
So can you participate via Zoom while on personal travel or vacation?
Yeah, we have had several people do that. Obviously, there's an element of confidentiality. So wherever you are, as long as you're participating in a way there's nobody else is there who shouldn't be there, then it's all right. We have had people who are traveling and called into Zoom, and I think this remote environment will remain in some form, which does add a level of flexibility, which we had this year, and I think will continue on in some form.
All right, thank you. If selected, is it a secret that you are on the civil grand jury?
No, it's not. Our names are publicly on the Santa Clara Superior Court website. However, with that in mind, we've had issues with, I think, journalists contacting several of our jurors. So if you have social media, there is a possibility that they will ask you for information which you're not supposed to give.
Okay, thank you. And then how many jury members participate in each investigation?
That is something that I would ask again, we ask that the grand jury not release anything about their active investigations. So as a body, and as Allison said, if grand jurors are contacted individually to talk about investigations, they actually are asked to refer them to the court, because that penal code section 924.1 that I mentioned earlier does actually say that a grand juror can be found guilty of a misdemeanor if they release inappropriate deliberation or investigation information. So in terms of a committee assignments, that's something that the 19 members as a whole will come together and talk about what's needed, what's available, and who is interested. And so it's a conversation about what the workload it might be for a report or an investigation, what that interest level is, and then the body deciding how best to organize themselves with, of course, training and support provided. The court does have information that we provide about what best practices are from around the state, what we've seen in past grand juries, and we can help county counsel's office, as I mentioned, as a legal advisor, can also provide excellent guidance on how to organize themselves. But at the end of the day, the grand jury as a body really owns that process.
And when will the interview process begin?
So I can also just share that the application period will close on Friday, September 17th. If you have submitted an application, we are working very hard to get you scheduled for early October. And we hope to complete all interviews and get this process moving by the end of October, early November. In terms of next steps after that, I think Allison had mentioned earlier that there are a few other steps, including so the interview is actually with the presiding judge, and that was Judge Ted Zahner, and we saw his picture and quote earlier. But there's also a background check that is required. And so that would be the step after that. And then on December the 16th, there will be the official ceremony. And so the court is required to cull the applicant pool down to 30 finalists. We actually are not able to go above that number, which may be why someone had asked about how many times someone had applied, is because we have to get to that 30 number. And then those 30 names in a public ceremony, which all are welcome to attend. And this year, just so we know, will very likely be remote in this similar fashion by Zoom. So they get put into a big roller ball that looks very similar to a bingo machine, but hopper. And so those names go in there. And then in that public ceremony and under the supervision of our presiding judge, the 19-member panel is randomly selected. So there are a few steps to this process, but like I said, we're actively working to get that interview schedule put into place. And Allison, I think you have your hand up. I don't know if there's something you wanted to add to that.
No, it was just for a previous question, just a quick comment, but you can definitely finish.
Oh, no, please. I think unless I didn't answer everything about that.
No. So in response to, is it JRVR? There is no cap on each investigation. I would echo Brittany. There is, it just depends on how many people. It's a conversation, but there is no cap maximum. There is no minimum.
Okay, and I think we've addressed all the questions in the chat and want to invite, it's 5 o'clock, and to invite anyone to unmute if there's a final question you're really wanting to get to have answered. And then thanks, Brittany, for sharing in the chat. If you have additional questions, you can always email, and the phone number is in the chat as well. Okay, so this concludes our presentation on the civil grand jury. We want to express appreciation for all of you who took time out of your day to attend. And I'm grateful for Allison, Deb, Shane, and Brittany for participating. And I know I learned a lot about the civil grand jury And I always feel inspired when I have the opportunity to listen to people who give their time to our community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. We appreciate you hosting this session, and thank you, everyone.